meeting for Thursday, December 17th at 5 p.m. This is held at both 109 East Olive Street and virtually at the live stream link provided. Katie, can we have a roll call?
Castillo? Mr. Coos?
Here.
Ms. Chazelle?
Here.
Ms. Grayling?
Here.
Ms. Peters?
Here.
And Chairperson Charnett.
Present. Thank you very much. Did we have any public comment for this evening?
No one submitted public comment, and no one has emailed comments.
Thank you.
No.
Then we'll move on to the minutes. Do we have any comments for minutes from last meeting?
Yes. Would you expect less?
You beat me to it.
Okay, well, the first thing I have is on the draft page 2, and it's in the discussion area where it's underneath BHP 2819, and essentially Mr. Maurer's name was misspelled both places, or actually 3 places in those lines underneath Chairperson Klein introduced the item. So his name is spelled M-A-U-R-E-R, and it's pronounced Maurer, but so it kind of doesn't really sound its name, but it is there. So we have those 3, and under old business, we have where we asked for Mr. Boyle for updates on the steam plant. And Mr. Boyle said as to whether asbestos was found at the site or not, said in this case there was not. And Chairperson Klein confirmed that I would say there is no indication of pending change in this case to make that flow better.
All right.
And I think that's all I had.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Okay, then can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I motion that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Okay, can we do that by a roll call or voice vote? Which one do we have to do for that? Roll call. Okay, so it is.
For everything.
No, they all need to be by roll call under this format.
Yay.
Mr. Coos?
Yes.
Ms. Chazelle?
Yes.
Ms. Grayling?
Yes.
Ms. Peters?
Abstain.
And Chairperson Charnett.
Yes. Okay, we will move on to the regular agenda for this evening. We have BHP 2819, public hearing, review, and action on a petition submitted by the Franklin Park Foundation for the nomination and designation of the State Farm Building at 112 East Washington Street. Would staff please provide a report? This is continued from November 19th.
Thank you, Chairperson Charnett. We have received some additional information from the applicant, and the applicant is on the phone. That information is in your packet, and I guess just kind of this, George, do you want to talk about procedure right now, or what? Chairperson Charnett, what would you like us to do? You just have additional information that's been presented and is included in the packet, and the applicants can provide testimony on that. The applicant is on the call, and then so is a representative from Urban Equity Partners.
Yeah, so I will provide just a comment that I've talked to Katie about this and how we might proceed this evening. The idea for discussion at this point is that the city will still have to prepare a report for this project. So following all of the information that's been received, the only purpose of tonight's discussion will be to establish enough of a way to move forward with the city so that they can prepare this report, and then it can be put before the Planning Commission. So this evening, I would love it if staff could talk a little bit about the information that was received and the updates that are associated therewith.
Just a point of clarification. So I think what we're talking about doing here then is if there's not an objection from either the petitioner or from the property owner, would be to proceed towards a hearing applying the criteria for a historic landmark in 8-4B2, so that there would be a finding, at least a finding made of historic significance, a discussion of the information that's been brought forward, input from both the petitioner and the applicant, with the idea that following that discussion tonight, staff, guided by what the discussion is, would go back and prepare a resolution and preliminary findings to bring to the next meeting for folks to then vote on and help us shape, so that when the resolution is adopted, we're able to stay within that 7-day time frame that we have to provide a plan and a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Is that what we're looking at, Chairman Charnett?
That's exactly right. Thank you, George. I appreciate that. It's very much what we're after this evening, and I think that's the concern, is that as soon as we decide on this, we want to make sure that city has an appropriate amount of time to adopt these measures and this report information, so that this can be adequately recorded and adequately enforced in the future. There are a number of items that we definitely need to discuss as we're looking at the ordinance, the report requirements, start talking about types of construction, alteration, demolition, removal, types of significant exterior architectural features, very specific elements that we have to address so that these remain protected or we allow them to be modified in the future. So that's kind of the discussion this evening, but I think to start out, it would be good just to briefly talk about the information that has already been provided from staff, and if those have met the staff's criteria as part of our previous discussions.
Would the chairman have an objection to finding out, just maybe hearing a little bit from Urban Equity Partners or Urban Equity Properties, I'm sorry, or the applicant, or should we just hear a little bit about the information as you suggested? I don't necessarily have a point of view on it. I was just putting up, at some point we'd want to hear from both the applicant and the property owner as to whether they have an objection to the procedure we outlined.
At this point, I'd like to just hear about the information that's been provided.
Okay.
And then we can go ahead and open that up as we normally would for
Sounds good.
Discussion.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairperson Charnett, city staff, the previous recommendation from staff was that the application as it had been presented was missing some information. The applicant, which is the Franklin Park Foundation, went back and did some additional research, and that's included in your packet. They've prepared kind of a summary memo that outlines the additional information that they've included with their petition, the supplemental information. There's another petition that had previously been submitted and withdrawn, architectural design information from 1938, some renovation letters from the city when improvements were made on the property in 2002, There's some information from the State Preservation Office as well as the National Park Service. And so I feel like the person who's probably best able to explain that information, why they provided it, would be the applicant. But in regards to next steps, from the city's perspective, the board is tasked with establishing not only findings that the building meets the criteria for local landmark designation, but also in drafting that recommendation and that resolution that then goes on to the Planning Commission and ultimately City Council. As you mentioned, Chairperson Charnett, the commission is tasked with identifying, certain features that are worthy of preservation, such as maybe there's some architectural features that should be in the board's mind, should be preserved, and then what might need a review in the future with the certificate of appropriateness. Those are the types of discussions that would be had based on the information that's provided here, the testimony. But I just want to point out that this is also an opportunity to think about those features that would not currently be allowed under our existing ordinances, and kind of write in some of that flexibility to allow the building to be repurposed and reused. And let me give you an example. One thing that would be parking requirements, for example. So the building is in our downtown area, but under the existing code, if it were in the future converted to residential, for example, the property owner would have to provide parking for those residents, and parking can then cause, you have to have space for that. And so maybe that's on site, and that would involve some demolition, or maybe that's off site, which might involve demolition of other properties in the downtown. So one thing that the commission could consider if they wanted to go this route is writing in the ordinance, why it's important, since this building takes up the entire area of its lot, like it's built out to corner, has very, very little setbacks and very little room for additional parking. Maybe waiving that parking requirement is in the long-term interest of preserving the building, and then also allows it to be economically viable and repurposed, taking away that additional requirement. So thinking about this S4, if the board is going to make that recommendation and finds that it does meet criteria for designation, thinking about ways that it will extend the life of the structure and the landmark, and also encourage its preservation through making it feasible to reuse. That's something to consider, I think. I can answer any questions you might have, but like I said, I think the person who can speak best to the information provided is probably the applicant. But we can talk too about the criteria that this final resolution and kind of report would include. Some additional, in your packet, you have a list. We prepared a memo that outlines, the different information that's needed to be included in this final report. And that's the explanation of the significance, and then some of those design guidelines that we were talking about. So like parking requirements or signs or building height. The setbacks is another example, materials that are used for the preservation. And
a question that I would have that goes along with that is whether staff now believes, because we had said before, or staff had said before, that the recommendation was to not recommend approval. Has staff now received sufficient information to change that opinion?
I think what is definitely provided is more information for the commission to consider. It's definitely more robust. Whether or not staff, I guess we would kind of defer to the commission and your expertise as to whether or not you think it meets the criteria established before. We didn't really provide a recommendation, and are interested in hearing testimony from the applicants as well.
Okay. Well, then I guess we should open it up for discussion from the applicant and from the property owner. Mr. Maurer, Mr. Orduno? I don't know if I'm saying that right.
This is Orduno. I'll defer to Mr. Maurer to kick off with what he had to say, and I'll generally indicate that we as the property owner, Urban Equity Properties, are supportive. I think to staff's point, there may just be a couple of things that we just want to work out, including signage, and I was hopeful we'd have some drawings from our tenant there on signage, but I understand with COVID, everything's running a little slowly. But just to kind of cut to the chase here,
before you get started, if you wouldn't mind just swearing in for a moment here.
Oh, sure.
Please state your name and address.
Jeff Orduno, O-R-D-U-N-O. Address 134 North 1st Street, Rockford, Illinois, 61107.
Thank you. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Okay, please continue.
Okay, and like I said, my goal here is to actually defer to Mr. Maurer, and he's assembled the information. Our concerns as the property owner are more very finite things. I don't think there's really much to dispute or debate as to whether the building is historic. I think you'd probably laugh us out of the place if we said otherwise, and it is. It's a beautiful, brilliant old building that has so much history for not just even the city and the region, but the country. So I think it's more a matter, to staff's suggestion, that, we find just kind of the things that could possibly be issues given the specifics of the building. For example, I thought the point that it's a zero lot line building. So if we try and apply going forward, try and apply the standard parking requirements to it, that's an issue. Signage, we already know that there will be a need for different signage on the building. Definitely fitting the building and fitting, the other requirements of signage, but we know that's coming. So as far as the exterior of the building, I think there are some very finite things. My understanding is that this doesn't intend to regulate the interior of the building, because one point I would make is that in the materials submitted that the applicant provided, they have things depicted in the interior drawings that they simply don't exist anymore. They were dismantled long ago, before we got the building. So, but interior things I don't understand to be affected by this. So my recommendation, tracking with the staffs, would be that the staff and the applicant and we sit down over the space of the next, few weeks going into your next hearing and just iron out, what their recommendation and findings are, so that they can reduce that to writing. And I don't think that there would be much dispute about those, and then figure out the path forward on these couple of very finite things. But I think those are really small things. And, I like the suggestion of kind of let the staff start to work on this, and then that way they bring back a recommendation that you're able to enact, and then within the time frame, turn it to the next step, and everybody's moving forward in tandem on that.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Maurer, did you have some comments that you want to add?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name's Tim Maurer, 317 East Chestnut Street, Bloomington, Illinois, and I'm appearing on behalf of the Franklin Park Foundation, the petitioner on this nomination.
And you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is truthful?
I do so affirm.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It was good to hear Mr. Orduno's comments. He's been magnificent to work with throughout the process. the attitude aligns with ours entirely. The comments that I was going to make, and I'll try to be as brief as possible on this, is that there's basically four things: the timeline on how we got here, the Preservation Commission's what your obligation is today. Third thing is the supplemental materials that I provided. And the fourth thing is some photos that I just sent to Katie a little bit ago, and I just got them from the McLean County History Museum, and I wanted to share them with you as a little bit of a flashback. So on the timeline, this petition was filed about a year ago, July, and then amended and resubmitted in August. And then we were scheduled for a hearing, and that's when Mr. Arduino was the first opportunity we had to meet him. He suggested that he was amenable to the petition and that he wanted a little more time to understand the type of use that they intended for this building. They were looking at multifamily residential as well as perhaps office and retail. And so that took, several months through that process. And then that kind of settled down. And I think that's about when COVID kicked in, and there was a few hiccups in the schedule and some rearranging to get things so that it could be handled. Then we kind of were, the owner and the petitioner were working together to make sure we had enough information. There was the sign issue. The Community Development Department put together a list of supplemental material they required, and that added a little additional time that we had to request for the patience of the commission. And here we are today. So it's been a lengthy process, but I think overall, you'd have to say a good one, because it's ending up in a informed, aligned, and hopefully positive direction.
Thank you for your endurance.
Well, good things are worth waiting for, I think, sometimes. And again, I think this is an important, just kind of adding on to that, is that this is an important opportunity for everybody, because the alignment and the collaboration between a commission and a nonprofit and an owner on a historic building, if it can be done in a cooperative way, that's a win for the community, I would say. The supplemental materials, this was an interesting process. There's a whole bunch of them that are in there. There's a lot more that could be available, and I think will be available eventually. It turns out, in a former life, I was the owner representative on a certified rehabilitation of this building. And it was, I don't know if it was exactly $12.5 million. I think that may have been what we put on our tax return, but we had lots of different things going on the exterior of the building, the terracotta, the exterior brick, some window openings on the west side that had been bricked in, and we decided to open up and put windows in, all, I think from ground level to the top floor. We did modifications to the old auditorium on top. It's been a lot of different work, but the good news there is that process, because it had to be a certified restoration and go through the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, there was a lot of good work was done on it. Jenny Elsner was the architect engineers from Chicago that prepared the project documents for us and did a lot of the oversight on it. So that material, which I have not been able to get in definitive form, and it does exist, the original architects engineers do have the copies in their archives. There are copies of everything that was submitted in the National Park Service National Records Center in Washington, D.C. And I think, and unfortunately, the state cannot locate their set of records, and the city can't locate their set of records. So out of the four sources, there's two that are still viable, and I think that would be something that as this report is going forward, if there's a positive recommendation by the commission, this would be an opportunity to supplement the supplements, so to speak. So, but what we do have is we do have a record that it was an exterior certified rehabilitation. We do have records of the pictures and documentation of its evolution over the years. We have the technical reporting from State Farm's staff, Steve Ambrose's report on the year and the square footage and the material types and those sort of things. So that's valuable to understand. And we also have some testimonials from the State Historic Preservation Officer, which I think was generous of her to provide. So there can be more. I think we've moved that ball forward pretty substantially. So to sum up those 3 points is that as a petitioner, we feel that this is a very important building to recognize is in the city. The idea is to do things that with the Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission that will, going forward, will allow the ownership and the community to preserve and reuse a building in a way that recognizes its past, puts a little bit of procedure in place so that making sure that those things are, whatever's done to the building is done in a transparent way with the ability to have input and consensus built around it. And I think it could be a precedent for some of the vanishing history we're losing in this community and have lost. Which brings me to the 4th point that I wanted to mention to you is that, I don't know if Katie's showing you the photographs, but there are some photographs of a Preservation Commission site field trip that we did to the Chicago and Alton Yards at the behest of, and I can't remember his last name. He's a former council member in the city council. He worked for the McLean County, Livingston County Labor Union group. His first name's Mike, and he requested that we consider designating the Chicago and Alton Yards that are on the west side, that West Chestnut area, and because he felt that it was a exemplar, the built environment, even though it was in a ruinous state. The skeleton of what was a major, if not the major, economic engine for McLean County, and providing context and employment and history, was just going gradually disintegrating and was going to be demolished. Well, we didn't act as a commission at that time. And if you look, some of the people that are in those pictures, there's actually a photo of me wearing a tie, so that's something noteworthy. But you've got Dan Behringer, who was the archivist at State Farm. You've got Ken Emmons, who was the city planner at the time. Russell Francois. I think Greg Coos is in there as well, as a matter of fact. And we should have acted on and done something for that, and we didn't. And it is entirely gone now. There's no landmark of what went on there. There's a lot of good documentation, a lot of photographs, but there's no built environment. And of course, the State Farm building is in much better condition, has an owner that's very positively engaged on this, and I don't think the owner of the railroad yards was that way. So this is an opportunity for this commission to do, excuse me, to do a good thing. And so I appreciate your attention to our petition and your patience for all these months of getting to this moment where we're going to have a hearing on our petition. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions about anything that I've said or submitted, or about the petition in itself, or anything, be sure to, I'm willing to answer those questions today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Maurer. I certainly appreciate your tenacity in getting this thing resolved. I think we certainly are a commission that wants to see buildings preserved. It's sort of our purpose. So when we see something like this, we want to do it in the best way possible. And thank you for sharing in that vision. I would raise this to the commission to see if there are any other questions that they want to ask Mr. Mauer.
Paul, I have a question, if that's okay, if I could ask for Mr. Mauer. Just curious if you were able to find anything about the original sign. We don't have any permits that I'm aware of on file. I think it was established before our sign code was established. And so I don't know, Mr. Mauer, if you have any info on the original sign or at least some information on the size of it.
I do not have anything that's going to be worthy of submitting to you. I mean, certainly the pictures show you, and the photographs show you what's available, but or what was there. And I know that State Farm removed, and I believe they preserved those. I'm not sure where they are. I do think that they are still maintained by the company in storage, so we could probably access them. But I don't have anything additional on that. And I do think, though, that if the owner and Mr. Aduno would engage with us on that, I think that the company and its archivist would be willing to, when they're able to. They've been kicked out of their offices, so they have to work from home, and that makes it a little more difficult. But when time permits, I think we could get that information.
Yeah, that would be very helpful information if we're going to examine anything related to signage in the future, if that's going to be something optional for future reuse.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions from any of the other commission members or anybody else on the call?
Well, hey, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
It's Tim Mauer. The only thing I skipped over and I meant to say, and I know you're aware of this, but I think it's worth putting into the record here, is that at this stage of the hearing, really and you know your job better than I do, but the ordinance reads, the Preservation Commission shall make findings and a recommendation as to whether the nominated landmark or historic district meets the criteria for designation and adopt such findings by resolution. And I think it only has to, under the ordinance, meet one of the many criteria that are listed there. I certainly think we do. So again, I urge you to adopt the nomination. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, if no one else has
just kind of a point of clarification. It seems to me that we have begun the hearing, is what I've heard it referred to like it's going to happen, and then just now as it is happening. I mean, I think we're having sworn statements and testimony. Is that where we're at, Mr. Chairman, or?
Right now, we're sort of the pre-adoption. I don't anticipate that we'll take a vote on this tonight, but rather a vote to have the city prepare the appropriate report that would then follow up with this information. There are items that we need to discuss, the specific features, signs, lights, parking, et cetera, that are elements to the building and elements of this report that have to be addressed before we can formally vote on the report, so that then there's that 7-day timeline that it has to be turned around to the commission.
All right. Can we see for the record if there are others individuals who are present on the call to address the petition?
Yeah, if there are any others, please.
George, there's no one else on the call other than Mr. Mauer and Mr. Orduno. And
okay.
no
I
one
just
else,
wanted to establish that for the record.
And City Hall is closed to the public, so there's no one at City Hall.
Are
Thank
we
Greg
ready?
Here. If there's any questions about any of the material that on the historic background that Mr. Mauer submitted, or any further elucidation of any of those points, I would be happy to address those.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, then I might just open this up for discussion to talk about the specific features. Katie and I talked earlier today specifically about those items that we need to include in the report, such as the sign, parking, any of those elements that we might want to include. And I would entertain as much discussion as we'd like regarding those items. And then specifically on the building, I would bring up, there are some very specific architectural elements, the penthouse and the roof, the masonry on the exterior, what happens on the bottom floor or the windows or the lights over time. I know that those lights are a pretty penny to maintain. Is that something that would ultimately, we as a commission would believe could be modified with LED or something in the future so that they are not so cost prohibitive but retain the character? I think these are all very important elements that we just simply need to bring up as part of this report as we move forward and ask the city staff to put in the ordinance as it's presented. Dawn, please go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm new, so I really don't know like a lot of the history on this, but I guess just from reading the packet and what I'm hearing so far, my question is, you know, I had S4, I had applied for S4 on my property, and I guess I'm trying to understand where that line is between this property is appropriate to be designated as S4, and we need to make all these decisions now on what the requirements are for the property.
Yeah, so doing the S4 overlay, what this is about is that it would, because it's already part of the district, the downtown district. However, we're trying to specifically zone this property as an overlay for that S4, which means we need to have specific information because moving forward, that's what we will have to enforce. So whatever we talk about now, whether it's the exterior glass, you know, let's say there's leaded glass or something, we want to retain that leaded glass, we just have to make sure that we have something in there that this is a specific element that we need to preserve. My
question is how does that differ from any other property that we would be designating as S4?
Yeah, in many ways it doesn't. This is just all part of the procedure that goes along with it. So in this particular instance, there's a little bit more scrutiny, I think, because it's a bigger building and it's got a lot of provenance that goes along with it. And it's particularly important in our community to protect this landmark. So I think we're doing as much due diligence as we normally would, but perhaps it's magnified to a greater degree on this.
I guess that's my question is where are we crossing a line that we're setting a precedent that any applicant in the future who has a quote unquote extra significant property has to abide by, you know, certain criteria they have to meet in order to get the designation.
Dawn, I can
thank you.
I can maybe jump in, but the as part of the okay, I think there's two parts to this, right? Like you were just saying, there are, and like Mr. Maurer said in his testimony, there's the criteria to establish whether or not it is a local landmark and worthy of designation. And then there is the kind of the parameters as to what that designation entails and means for the property. And so I think what Chairperson Charnett is discussing is maybe the second part right now is kind of after, you know, if it is designated, then what does that mean for the property? What are those features that should be preserved or should require a certificate of appropriateness? And the way that the zoning code and the preservation ordinance is outlined is that a certificate of appropriateness is generally required for any exterior work that would require a building permit, as well as anything specified in the designating ordinance. And there's certain things that in the designating ordinance that, maybe kind of as what we were saying with the parking, for example, maybe there are certain things in our current code that would be detrimental to the long-term goal of preserving the building. And so those would be called out in that designating ordinance. I don't know when you went through designation on your property and what that process looked like. But we kind of went through this previously with a home on White Place, where the property owner submitted information about all of the decorative gingerbread features on her building and the things that made it unique. And so the commission, made their designation as to whether in that case, that property was considered significant. And then those features are outlined in the ordinance as well. So where you wouldn't normally need a permit to tuck point or repair, your home, your foundation, but in the case of that house, because the decorative gingerbreading mixed into the masonry, that would require a certificate of appropriateness. Does that help provide example?
Yeah, it does. I guess my understanding was just for S4, we had like a general, over, set of guidance that, at least in my experience, had followed, pretty much all the exterior. But what I hear you saying is, it is getting more specific, and some things are being called out and designated as these are specific characteristics that we would like that property to maintain.
Yeah. I think too, one thing that we're talking about here that wouldn't have been true for your situation, Don, which yours was going to go from a residence to a residence, and this is going from one usage to potentially lots of other kinds of things that could happen. And so I think that we need to take that into consideration, considering this may be a totally different usage than that for which this building was originally used.
And I would add that I think that this is a proportionate level of scrutiny. So what you might do on your house, because there are only so many limited uses and so many limited things that could happen, we're acknowledging that we also have to do the same sort of thing, but it's proportionate to the building and its importance and use, and et cetera.
Yeah. Yes, this is a significantly contributing building to our downtown historic landscape. And so, whereas in a neighborhood situation, yes, each building is important, but this is of such magnitude that it would be tantamount to losing our Museum of History or whatever. I mean, it would change the landscape drastically to not have this.
Oh, I'm not arguing against it.
I'm just saying that's kind of what we're trying to think about.
Yeah.
Here.
Okay, any other discussion?
I think it would be, just from a staff perspective, it would be helpful to know, maybe general consensus or kind of how and George or Kimberly, feel free to tell me to shut up if I'm overstepping, but to get a general feel for, if the direction that the board is based on what they've received so far, if there are certain features that need additional research or that you need more information on, so we can put that report together. For example, like the sign, or you mentioned the lighting, Mr. Charnett, like what are those external characteristics based on what you've received? That would be helpful to know as staff. So when we go back and we're starting to draft this, for example, and one way we could approach it is, we could look at if you want, I can pull up this part of the ordinance and we can kind of look at what's required in that report. But like the massing of the building and the setbacks and the height and, the sign regulations and, go ahead, George.
Oh, I was just going to say that with regard to that, I think Mr. Charnett, you were saying you'd rather not have any kind of vote in terms of an initial finding of significance at this point.
Right, because we would be obligated to follow along with the report, as I understand it, immediately following that. Is that correct?
George, would it be
I
possible?
think the 7 days, and Katie, you can correct me if your understanding is different. I was thinking that it's possible to make a finding of significance, but that the 7 days would be from from the adoption of a resolution, finding its significant, and then and the recommendation to the planning commission, which would then, we have to do the report within 7 days of that passage of the resolution. Is that your understanding, Katie?
So this is in chapter 44, 8-4. And yes, so part of that report is the, I'm sorry, I'm looking in the landmarks. I'll put
There's
this
a
on,
couple. Yeah,
on
go
the
ahead. I'm
screen.
sorry.
No, you're fine. I'll share it on the screen. So we can all look at it. Hopefully you can see the code. So the George, it reads, within 60 days, the Preservation Commission shall make findings and a recommendation as to whether the landmark or historic district meets certain criteria and adopt such findings by resolution. The resolution shall be accompanied by a report. But it doesn't say that those have to happen at the same meeting. So I guess, yeah, I would maybe agree with George in that you could make your findings, and then we'll put that into a resolution and the report, and then adopt the resolution. And Kimberly, what do you think? Does that? Yeah, she's nodding.
I mean, another way to do it that I think you were indicating is the way to go forward, and I'm not trying to get in the way of our line of sight here if we've got one, but is, there could be discussion. Based on that, we could come up with a proposed resolution and consider that the findings and pass it then, if that's what your preference is,
Yeah, I mean, what I would prefer tonight, if we could at least have some discussion about what those items are. What I'm concerned about is that there are holidays and things coming up here where people are going to be quite busy, and particularly staff. I don't know the availability of what that's going to look like. So I'd like to give them enough time to address any of those comments and make sure that it's included in that report. So if we do want to vote on this tonight, I'm very comfortable with voting it for significance of the property. What I would like to establish, though, before we vote is, or what some of those elements we'd like to protect, or that could be added to that report for review at the next meeting.
Can I make a comment or a question?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I looked over the packet. Maybe I missed it somewhere, or I need to be guided here. I've heard signage mentioned a couple of times, but I don't remember seeing anything about signage in the packet unless I overlooked it. Can someone direct me?
You are correct. There's not signage in the packet. That's just something that is up for discussion that isn't.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
So I might like to start out then and take note of a few pieces that I think are very important architectural elements to the building that I have concern about being retained or modified in the future. For instance, all of those ground floor windows and terracotta and what's happening with the granite base and just the aesthetics that kind of go along with some of that. I would open that up to the commission if we believe that those are important elements, or if those should be able to be modified at some point in the future to allow for more storefront glazing, or for instance, you could take out the bottom of the windows and put new openings and divide that space into multiple tenants by allowing multiple entrances on the exterior. Is that something that we would we would feel comfortable allowing.
Just in terms of previous submissions, the section 6, its embodiments of elements of design, detailing, materials of craftsmanship that render it architecturally significant, is not a comprehensive list, but I think a useful list that could guide discussion. And in terms of your specific question about entries, it appears as if there were original architectural intent for multiple entries on a Washington Street facade that were indicated by rondelles over those specific openings. So I think that might give some guidance as to architectural intent that is contained within that building itself, as how such openings were meant to be addressed by Schaefer and Houghton in 1928.
Hi, Greg. This is George. I was thinking with your having recused yourself that you weren't going to be participating in the conversation. I don't mean that in any offensive way.
I am not identifying any specific position. What I'm trying to do here, George, is interpret the historic evidence that has been entered into this discussion, and I'm trying to address this from a viewpoint of what the historic evidence is without taking a position about the meaning of that historic evidence. Does that make sense? If you feel that I am at risk,
I'll tell you.
I will.
Normally, what we do is actually have people, and I know we're not doing this in the same room, but actually leave the room once there's a recusal. So I guess I was just fine with, if you want to listen, fine, but
okay.
It would be best if you'd be out of it since you've recused yourself.
Well, if I recuse myself to that level, do we still have a quorum?
Yeah.
Okay.
George, I think what Mr. Coos was referring to, though, is in the information submitted by the petitioner. This would be the first item following their letter. It's the Bloomington Normal Historic Preservation S4 designation. That's the exhibit that he's referencing, or was calling to the attention of the commission.
Well,
Sure, and I don't think that's necessarily fatal to the process or anything, but I was just trying to respect the rules that we have.
No, I
about
understand.
Recusal, and pointing to the exhibit is, like I say, I'm not setting off major alarm bells or problems. I hope we don't have to
and not
debate
to
it, but
add any complexity too, but I mean, anyone could nominate this sort of thing, and as far as discussion and moving forward as far as the commission and that kind of thing, I understand why Mr. Coos has recused himself, but at the same time, I don't know that it's totally necessary for meeting the letter of the law. But hey, you're the guy who interprets it better than I do.
I, for one, appreciate the fact that we did have that point drawn by Mr. Coos. I was also wondering about multiple entries and the use for ground level tenants, perhaps, that wouldn't be there in a building like this where one tenant has the whole building. Now we're possibly going to have multiple tenants, and there would be a need for additional entrances in that situation. And then, has the building been constructed so that we could allow that? And yes, apparently it has. And that's a good thing to know.
Well, and I think it's especially important because had Mr. Coos not shared that information, we would have to discuss that at our next meeting, which means he would have had to have made some sort of comments to that effect after this meeting. So I think it's very important that whatever information we need to address right now, we probably should, even if we can, Mr. Boyle, ask Mr. Coos a couple of questions that are associated with it so that we can get some resolution and move forward.
Because I think Mr. Coos has an intimate relationship with this building that few of us can say we have. I know I don't, because he's done so much research on it.
I agree.
So back to Paul's initial concern with the entrances. How would we address something like that? Like in a resolution, how would we address that?
Well, I guess I would put it this way. If we are to retain the existing openings in their existing configuration, only in their existing configuration, it would not allow any other entrances. If we
Right.
allow modification, but retain the openings in their spirit, for instance, the top of the windows, the size of the windows, et cetera, but you could eliminate part of the granite base and have some of that modification, and whatever you do within that opening is up to you. That's perhaps another way to handle it.
Yeah.
But in reviewing the exterior, we certainly wouldn't want to do something that is so antithetical to the purpose of the facility that it looks so ghastly different. Now, having said that, there are some great Daniel Libeskind projects where he takes something that's real funky and he puts it right next to, there's lots of ways to handle buildings. But to me, it's more about, are we comfortable with allowing other entrances as opposed to modification of existing openings? Because we are now saying that as part of our commission, we would support bringing some things up to ADA accessibility, and how we get in and out of the building would be impacted by that.
Mr. Charnett, if I can, or Chairperson Charnett, if I can just offer a suggestion. We do still have the applicant and the property owner on the call, and you can also direct questions towards those participants. For example, if the applicant, Mr. Maurer, may have some research on what the building, how it was originally designed based on his background and his research, and then Mr. Orduno may have some input or testimony as to, their ability to provide accessibility, and, if that is something that would be, that they would be interested in accommodating as well, ground entrances, things like, you can always, those are just examples, but I just wanted to remind you that they're on the call and you can ask them questions as well.
And
Yeah,
I
it might be
appreciate
useful to know. It might be useful to know what the plans, urban equity properties may have, what plans they may have in the future, or what kinds of parameters they feel they can match.
And I certainly appreciate that, and I want to have their input as much as possible. I agree, and I may ask them here shortly, but they may not be the only owners that have this building. So I think we also need to be respectful that there's a long-term piece that goes with it. So with that being said, perhaps it would be wise to ask Mr. Maurer, Mr. Orduno, about the floor plan, if it actually lends itself to wanting to put those things in the exterior. Maybe this is an issue, maybe this is a non-issue based on what that looks like.
Are you still able to hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
I would, my feeling on this is the State Farm has consistently, I think, had the entrances since I've been aware of the building on the north and the south end, and then there's one in the parking deck on the west side. And of course, that parking deck on the west side was added, I think, sometime in the 90s, maybe, I want to say. But of course, there may have been entrances on the east side as well. And I just sent Katie a picture of the building from the application that shows the building, I'm guessing sometime in the 30s, that where it's only basically the south half of the block, south half of the block. It shows the State Farm insurance sign that was on that thing. It also shows the auditorium, but because it was only half of the block, my guess is it had an entrance on the east side, but I do not know that for sure. I do think the information that the archivist at State Farm has would unquestionably document this, because they have, I believe, a complete set of whatever State Farm's ever had on this. They have. But and speaking more broadly about reuse of retail first level space, I think what you're saying, Chairman Charnett, is exactly right. This is what was anticipated to be done with these areas, even though this building was maybe purpose built as an office building and they never intended to have first level use for the public. It still would be appropriate, if it's handled and designed correctly, to do openings to accommodate retail use. I would also offer this, is that during my tenure at State Farm, they modified the entrances on the north and south end to accommodate a ADA access ramp for the electronic key card entry that's adjacent to the turnstile doors. So, and I think they did a really excellent job of doing that, as a matter of fact. But so there has been a history of modification to the exterior to accommodate new uses and new code requirements.
Just for the record, George Boyle, this is for you, historic piece. I'm not opining here. I'm simply making a historic observation. And that is that State Farm building was originally designed, that south part of it, the original part, with a separate tenancy on the first floor that was to be set up for a bank. And so it was intent for public access out of a secondary entrance. It was designed for upper utilization of the corporation, first floor utilization as a rental for a bank. And so the idea of separate tenancy was part of the original concept. And again, I would refer you to the large rondelles that are found on the Washington Street facade and on the Jefferson Street facade that were specifically located there, that break up the smaller rondelle pattern for the purpose of marking where principal entrances are. And you can see those in the architecture and design magazine insert that Mr. Maurer provided. The image captioned office building for State Farm insurance companies. You can also see that when State Farm just put in what was an appropriate handicap entrance or ramp entrance for the point in time, they actually utilized that concept. And the current south facade has currently 2 entrances. So you can actually imagine how that would work in other areas, keeping within the, again, you will see that same rondelle situation on the north side.
I would concur with that, and typical with buildings that were designed similarly, this is using sort of a European Renaissance model for the periphery there, particularly what you'd see on the Medici's buildings, where they were bankers, right? That's how they made a lot of money. And so when you saw banking around there, they were using some of these materials that were a little bit more robust, and some of those features, any architect worth the salt would have known that at the time, and would have pulled some of those references into the facade. So I see a lot of that, and I agree wholeheartedly that I think that those elements are in fact designed and very important to it. I would position myself that I'm not opposed to seeing some of those existing window openings, even the double window openings, modified at some point in the future, provided that they're done where they leave the limestone or terracotta, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think that's a sandstone of some kind, that wraps in place. You can see on the south facade that one opening where it's wrapped in limestone instead, and there's a little bit of decor that goes along with it, and that kind of copper bronzy finish. And that's one that's been there and it's done well, and I certainly don't have any objection to it. But on the north side, it is retained, that limestone or sandstone, excuse me, is retained. And I would imagine that we would keep some of those features because they are very difficult to duplicate now with any accuracy and without great expense to someone modifying them in the future. And I don't oppose any of the other openings being used necessarily, even on that east facade where we have that big old granite base that's huddling up to a window. That must be a very, very important window, or it could have been an entrance at some point, or proposed entrance. So I think that I'm very open to it. If everyone else is, I'll put that to the commission. I can't hear you, Greg. I think you're on mute.
For the record, the stonework around the windows and the doors is Joliet Dolomite.
Thank you. Good to know.
George,
Do you have some, go ahead, Kate.
I guess Chairperson Charnett, do you mind if we just take like a 5-minute recess real quickly so I can talk to George about, I have a question for him that I'd like to discuss. So would you be okay with that?
I have no problem with that if everybody else is okay with it.
Okay, Katie, would you like to just, we'll just break for 5 minutes here on the Zoom call and you can give me a call?
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right. Let's break we'll return here at 6:15 p.m.